There is a very specific, acrid smell that burning plastic makes when it's melting over $60,000 worth of regret, a scent that sticks in your nose like the memory of a bad divorce. And as I stood there in the flickering orange glow of a bonfire that used to be a luxury SUV, listening to the popping sound of electrical shorts snapping like gunfire in the Arizona night, I realized that sometimes, just sometimes, the universe doesn't just serve karma, it cooks it well done, and serves it with a side of spectacular fireworks. My name is Liam O'Connor, and if you had told me 3 years ago that my life would turn into a crime thriller involving wire cutters, industrial espionage, and a woman named Pamela Sterling who treated our homeowners association like her own personal kingdom, I would have asked what you were smoking. But here we are, standing in the ashes of Whispering Palms in Mesa, Arizona, a place that was supposed to be my sanctuary after my life imploded. Let me take you back to the start, back when I was just a guy trying to piece his life together after a divorce that left me with an empty bank account, 2 teenage kids who needed stability, and a soul that felt like it had been run through a wood chipper. So for 2 years I lived like a monk, eating ramen that tasted like despair and skipping every luxury, including the morning coffee that makes life bearable, all because I had this one goal, this one shiny beacon of hope, which was to stop bleeding money into gas tanks and buy a used Tesla Model Y, a symbol that I was finally getting back on my feet. Being a licensed electrician for 20 years means I don't cut corners, I don't mess around with voltage, and I certainly don't ignore code. So when I finally bought that car, I treated the installation of my Level 2 charger like I was wiring a hospital, pulling the permits, double-checking the load calculations, and feeling that deep, quiet satisfaction of the conduit snapping into place. The smell of fresh ozone and concrete dust signaling that I was free from the gas pump and free to move forward. And then Pamela Sterling clicked her way down my driveway in those overpriced designer heels that sounded like a ticking time bomb. A woman who had just seized the HOA presidency because nobody else wanted the headache. A real estate agent whose smile was as bright and artificial as the high beams on her leased Audi Q5 hybrid. And she looked at my new charger not with neighborly interest, but with the hungry, calculating stare of a coyote spotting a wounded rabbit. "It's so great to see green energy in the neighborhood, Liam," she purred, leaning against my car with a familiarity that made my skin crawl, dropping hints about how wonderful it would be if we could share resources for the good of the community, which was her polished, corporate way of saying she wanted to plug her hybrid into the electricity I paid for, whenever she felt like it, for absolutely $0. When I politely explained that residential chargers aren't public utility stations and that I couldn't just have random cars pulling into my driveway at all hours, the mask slipped. The smile didn't just fade. It vanished like a blown fuse, replaced by a cold, dead look that told me I had just made a very powerful, very petty enemy. And suddenly the conversation shifted from community spirit to aesthetic violations and architectural review boards, the metallic taste of impending warfare, filling my mouth as she walked away. I thought that was the end of it, but Pam was just getting warmed up, because a week later I opened my mailbox to find an official letter on Whispering Palms letterhead, heavy and ominous, claiming my charger, which was barely visible from the street, was an eyesore, violating community standards that didn't exist, demanding a retroactive architectural approval fee of $200, and threatening daily fines that would bankrupt me within a month if I didn't comply. I did what any sane person would do. I called the management company who had no record of the complaint. I called the city who confirmed my permits were spotless, and then I called my buddy Gavin, a lawyer who laughs at bullies for a living. And he told me to dig into the statutes because Arizona has some very specific laws about this stuff, laws that Pam either didn't know or was arrogant enough to ignore. Armed with Arizona Revised Statute 33 to 1816, which basically says an HOA cannot block you from installing EV charging stations, I walked into the next community meeting at the rec center, a room smelling of stale coffee and floor wax. And when Pam tried to steamroll me in front of 15 bored neighbors, I didn't just speak. I read the law verbatim, watching her face cycle through shades of red that usually indicate a stroke, her authority crumbling in real time as I laid out my permits on the table like a royal flush. She didn't take it well. She sputtered about hostile environments and intimidation before storming out of the meeting, her heels clicking angrily on the linoleum like gunfire, leaving the rest of us in stunned silence, including Arthur Higgins, the sweet old guy from down the street who just shook his head and whispered that Pam had been acting erratic ever since her own divorce, hinting that maybe, just maybe, her real estate business wasn't doing so hot and she needed to feel powerful. Somewhere, anywhere. But humiliating a narcissist is dangerous business. And the next morning, a city code enforcement truck pulled up to my house, the officer looking apologetic as he explained that someone, an anonymous concerned citizen who definitely wasn't Pam, had reported dangerous unpermitted electrical work and fire hazards, forcing him to waste an hour inspecting a job that was technically perfect, shaking his hand at the end and telling me to document everything because this felt like harassment. Then came the utility company truck, responding to a report of major grid interference coming from my address. The lineman looking at my standard residential setup and laughing, saying it was like calling the SWAT team for a toaster, but the laughter died in my throat because I realized this woman was weaponizing public services to terrorize me, trying to bury me in bureaucracy because she couldn't beat me on the law. I started noticing her slow rolling past my house, that silver Audi creeping by like a shark in shallow water, her phone held up to the window snapping photos, and soon the neighborhood gossip mill, fueled by Martha Higgins, started churning out stories that Pam was telling people my charger was causing radiation, that it was messing with Wi-Fi signals, that it was a threat to property values, spreading fear like a virus among the young families like the Millers, who suddenly looked at my house with suspicion. Then she cornered me at the Safeway on Main Street, blocking my cart in the cereal aisle with the aggressive posture of a tank commander, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper as she told me she had a medical condition that required reliable transport and that if I didn't let her use my charger, she couldn't guarantee that the HOA wouldn't find other violations on my property, hinting at lawsuits and liens that would destroy my credit, a threat so naked and desperate it smelled worse than the discount seafood counter. I looked her in the eye, surrounded by boxes of frosted flakes, and realized this wasn't about electricity anymore. This was about a drowning woman trying to climb on top of me to keep her head above water, so I installed a high-definition security camera system that very afternoon, capturing every inch of my driveway, because my gut told me that Pamela Sterling was done playing by the rules, and if she couldn't bully me into submission, she was going to try something much, much darker. The escalation didn't happen all at once. It crept in like a slow voltage leak, starting with the kind of psychological warfare that makes you question your own sanity, like coming home to find my charging cable draped over the wrong side of the unit, or finding the weatherproof cover unlatched and swinging in the wind, small things that screamed, I was here, without leaving a fingerprint, but I knew. I felt it in my gut, the same way you feel the hum of a live wire before you touch it. Then she played the sympathy card, showing up at my door with tears in her eyes and a performance worthy of an Oscar, claiming her daughter was having a medical crisis at the university in Tucson and she needed to get there immediately, but her Audi was dead, and could she please, just this once, use my charger for an hour to get enough range. And because I'm a human being and a father, I swallowed my suspicion and punched in the code, telling her to go ahead. That was a mistake, because my cameras later revealed that while I was inside worrying about her sick daughter, Pam wasn't crying. She was prowling around my equipment like a cat burglar, photographing the serial numbers, testing the mounting brackets, and seemingly trying to figure out how to bypass the locking mechanism. And when she drove off 3 hours later, she didn't head toward Tucson. She headed straight for the luxury salon downtown, her emergency apparently being a root touch up. But the real bomb dropped when Arthur Higgins shuffled into my garage late one Thursday night, looking over his shoulder like he was carrying state secrets, handing me a manila envelope filled with documents that Martha had quietly copied from the management office where she worked part-time, documents that painted a picture of financial rot so deep it made my stomach turn. It turned out the Whispering Palms HOA had a surplus of nearly $50,000 that Pam had been hiding, but worse, she had been draining it, authorizing thousands in legal consultations to Hamilton and Partners, the exact same firm handling her messy divorce, and paying for landscaping audits from companies that didn't seem to exist, treating our neighborhood dues like her personal piggy bank because her real estate career was in the toilet and she was drowning in debt. We were sitting on a powder keg of embezzlement and fraud, But before we could even organize a strategy to expose her, Pam decided to move from white-collar crime to straight-up felony vandalism, driven by a desperation that was becoming dangerous, a frantic need to destroy the thing she couldn't control. It was 2:17 a.m. on a Tuesday when my motion sensors went crazy, waking me from a dead sleep with the aggressive buzzing of my phone, and I watched the live feed in horror as a figure in dark clothing, unmistakably Pam by the way she walked, crept up my driveway, clutching a pair of heavy-duty Black & Decker wire cutters, the kind you buy to cut through chain-link fences. She attacked my charging cable with the fury of a scorned lover, hacking at the thick insulation, struggling with the copper core, twisting and snapping until the cable fell limp, severed completely, leaving exposed wires that were still live, a lethal trap for anyone who might have touched them in the dark. And as she scurried away into the shadows, I didn't just feel anger. I felt a cold chill because this woman was no longer just a nuisance. She was a public safety hazard. Officer Davis arrived the next morning and watched the footage with a grim expression, noting that this wasn't just vandalism. It was reckless endangerment and felony criminal damage. And as he took the report, I saw Pam peeking through her blinds across the street, her face a mask of paranoia, realizing too late that in the age of 4K night vision, there are no secrets. But you can't fix stupid, and you certainly can't fix crazy, because even after being questioned by the police, even after I posted a vague safety warning on the neighborhood Facebook page about tampering with electrical equipment, Pam just couldn't help herself. She needed to have the last word. She needed to destroy the symbol of my defiance. 3 nights later, the sensors tripped again, but this time the air didn't smell like ozone. It smelled like chemicals, a suffocating cloud of fumes, and I watched on the monitor as Pam stood over my replacement charging station, holding a gallon can of Sherwin-Williams exterior white latex, appending it over the electronics, watching the thick goo ooze into the vents, clogging the ports, destroying the circuitry in a silent, spiteful act of drowning. I didn't wait this time. I called 911 while she was still in the driveway, and Officer Davis caught her red-handed, quite literally, with white paint splattered all over her designer yoga pants, stammering excuses about marking safety hazards as she was placed in handcuffs and marched into the back of a cruiser, a humiliated queen dragged from her throne. But even as they drove her away, I knew this wasn't the end. Because a narcissist never accepts defeat, they just escalate until they self-destruct. The annual homeowners meeting was supposed to be a boring affair where we debated pool hours and mulch colors. But after Pam's arrest and the rumors of embezzlement swirling like a desert dust devil, the community center was packed to the rafters. 47 angry homeowners squeezed into a room meant for 20, the air thick with the smell of nervous sweat and the impending explosion of a regime change. Arthur Higgins had helped me prepare a presentation that was essentially a forensic autopsy of Pam's corruption, charts showing the stolen money, the fake legal fees, and the compilation of security footage that showed our HOA president acting like a domestic terrorist, and the room was buzzing with a low, angry hum, the sound of a mob realizing they've been robbed by the person who was supposed to protect them. But Pam, out on bail and possessing a restraining order that explicitly forbade her from being anywhere near me, burst through the double doors like a hurricane, hair wild, eyes manic, clutching a stack of papers and screaming about conspiracies, looking less like a community leader and more like a villain in the final act of a breakdown, shouting that I was the one destroying property values, that I was the criminal, her voice cracking with the hysteria of someone watching their entire life crumble. Officer Davis, who was stationed at the back, stepped forward to arrest her for violating the court order, but Pam wasn't listening to reason. She wasn't listening to the law. She was listening to the chaotic noise in her own head that told her if she could just prove my charger was dangerous, if she could just prove she was right, everything would go back to normal. She bolted out the side door into the parking lot before anyone could grab her, sprinting toward my Tesla where my newly repaired charger was glowing softly in the dark. And the entire meeting spilled out after her, a chaotic wave of people watching in horror as she dragged her Audi Q5 alongside my car, screaming that she would show us all how unstable my equipment was. She grabbed the charging connector, which was designed for a Tesla, and tried to jam it into the port of her Audi, a square peg in a round hole. But fueled by adrenaline and madness, she forced it, twisting and jamming, overriding the safety pins, ignoring the sparks that started to shower down like Roman candles. Her face illuminated by the flashes of electricity arcing where they shouldn't be arcing. And then, with a sound like a shotgun blast, the battery management system in her car failed catastrophically, the mismatched voltage finding a path to ground through the lithium cells, and a jet of flame shot out from under the chassis of her luxury SUV, turning the night sky orange as the paint fumes from her previous vandalism ignited, transforming her $60,000 status symbol into a raging inferno within seconds. The heat was intense, pushing the crowd back as the fire department sirens wailed in the distance. Pam stumbling away from the blaze, coughing, her face smeared with soot, watching her car, her presidency, and her reputation burn to the ground in a heap of melting aluminum and toxic smoke, a perfect, terrifying visual metaphor for her life. In the aftermath, the justice was swift and brutal. Pam pleaded guilty to felony property damage and reckless endangerment to avoid jail time, paying out nearly $10,000 in restitution and agreeing to a permanent restraining order, her real estate license revoked, her finances in ruins, forcing her to sell her mansion at a loss and move to a grim apartment complex in Scottsdale, where she had zero authority over anyone. Arthur Higgins was elected the new HOA president in a landslide, and under his watch, we used the recovered funds to install community solar panels, turning Whispering Palms into a model green neighborhood. Property values skyrocketing not because of strict rules, but because it became a place where people actually wanted to live. A place where the only thing toxic was the memory of the woman who tried to steal our power and ended up burning herself. It makes you wonder, though, doesn't it? We rely on these little fiefdoms, these HOAs, to maintain order, but at what point does maintaining standards cross the line into tyranny? And why do we wait until the fire is literally burning before we stand up to the bullies who think the rules don't apply to them? How would you have handled Pam before it got this far? Do you think the neighbors were complicit by staying silent for so long? Let me know in the comments below.
Alright, and that is for today's videos. I hope you enjoyed it and found something useful. If you did, don't forget to like, subscribe and share it with your friends. Let me know your thoughts in the comment below. And thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.